From the 2010 to 2011 school year, there was an increase of 91,000 overall participants in athletic programs. This marks the 22nd consecutive year that an overall increase in athletic participants has been shown. Based on a survey, over 50% of students enrolled in high school participate in athletics. This statistic really emphasizes the fact that athletics really have a huge impact on students all across the country. Of the 8 million students nationwide that participate in athletics in high school, only about 460,000 will compete at a collegiate level. Still a large chunk of athletes, and it really still emphasizes the fact that athletics have a huge role and impact on students across the nation, whether it be in high school or in college. Along with these rather encouraging statistics comes a little bit less encouraging statistics as well. With the rise of athletic participation, especially in football, the rise of concussions and traumatic brain injury and head trauma has also risen at an alarming rate as well. In 2007, a study of American high school and collegiate football players showed 94 catastrophic head injuries in a 13-year period. Of these 94 head injuries, only 2 took place on a collegiate football field. Of these 94 players, 71% had already suffered a concussion in the same season, while 39% were still playing with lingering concussions. These statistics aren't as encouraging. They're actually really scary. This means that athletes are returning to play too soon following head trauma. Now, I should backtrack here and give a definition of what a concussion really is. Scientifically, a concussion is defined as an immediate and transient loss of consciousness accompanied by a brief period of amnesia following a traumatic head injury. But the loss of consciousness part isn't always the case. There's thousands on thousands of football players and other athletes that sustain concussions without losing consciousness. This is really dangerous because it goes against the scientific definition of a concussion. So most athletes just disregard the stars that they see, or they name them as stingers or dingers, and they don't pay attention to what's actually happening inside their brain. This brings me to an issue. Without the right education and without proper return to play guidelines following a concussion, athletes everywhere are at risk for sustaining short and long-term detrimental brain damage. And this is really important to get out there to young athletes. Their brains are still developing, and they're most at risk for the most serious injuries a brain can sustain from concussions. My argument is that more in-depth education and more strict guidelines need to be put in place to not only protect our youth from devastating brain injuries, but also a wide range of athletes from high school to collegiate to professional from life-altering neurological damage. This alarming rise in concussions has been referred to by scientists as the silent epidemic. It's really, truly running rampant in the world of sports. Reported in one of the most recent gatherings of statistics by Headcase that 3,800,000 concussions were merely reported, not diagnosed, in 2013. This is double the amount reported in 2002. This is only about a 10-year time span. Headcase also found that 90% of concussions diagnosed by a doctor or a physician in 2013 did not involve loss of consciousness. These recent findings really support the fact that young athletes don't even know what's happening to their body, especially if they're not losing consciousness. It really masks the fact that severe damage is being done to their brain and they might not think anything of it. I'm going to shift the focus slightly from high school sports to professional sports. In September of 2015, researchers at Boston University conducted a study on deceased NFL players. Of the 165 brains tested in the study, 131 of them showed signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. CTE is an example of a detrimental long-term effect of repetitive blows to the head, and this can definitely be seen in long-term career football players. 40% of the NFL players that were tested in the study were offensive and defensive linemen. These players received repetitive blows to the head every play of every game, thus making them good candidates. These recent findings suggest that it is the repetitive and more subtle head trauma that pose the greatest long-term threats to players. To put the job of a lineman in perspective, I'm going to use Miami Dolphins lineman Tom McHale as an example. In his short 9-year career, this 320-pound lineman is said to have sustained 20,000 blows to the head, if not more. In 2008, just 3 months after his 45th birthday, this once beloved football star was pronounced dead on the scene after taking his own life by overdosing on prescription pills. An autopsy done on McHale showed severe signs of CTE in his brain, and thus a link can be made between the sport and the life-altering disease. I say CTE is a long-term effect of concussions because it takes a long period of time for the disease to accumulate in the brain and really take its toll on the athlete. Things like second impact syndrome, or SIS, take a very short time to accumulate but leave devastating long-lasting effects, and this is what I consider short-term effects of concussions. SIS occurs when an athlete returns to play too soon following an initial brain injury, so like within several weeks of an initial brain injury, returns to play and receives a second blow to the head, causing severe swelling of the brain, and in a very short amount of time can result in death or paralyzation, loss of motor skills, etc. Injuries like SIS are 100% preventable. These injuries, especially short-term injuries, can be helped with more education and better and more strict return to play guidelines. Things like pamphlets handed out at the beginning of sports seasons to parents and players and coaches and team physicians and doctors could greatly benefit the decisions that athletes and their parents make on and off the field. Some athletes might feel pressure from their parents or other outside sources to play through the pain like they've always been taught growing up to do. But the reality is that concussions are not injuries that one can just shake off or rub dirt on. Concussions are real life-altering injuries and they need to be taken seriously. The Center for Disease Control has put together a return to play guidelines that, if a team does not have return to play guidelines, can very easily base their guidelines off of. This is a very good tool to use when dealing with an athlete that has suffered a concussion. Silently, concussions and their counterparts are claiming the lives and livelihoods of athletes everywhere. Statistics, case studies, and documented personal struggles give more than enough incentive to make the correlation between severe head trauma and football. It's not just football. Thousands of athletes across the nation suffer concussions every year, and these aren't to be taken any more lightly than concussions sustained on the football field are. It's up to the athlete and those cheering them on to make the right decision when it comes to taking care of a concussion. In order to prevent lives lost and futures hindered, a deeper understanding of the issue needs to take place. Visit this link to learn more about return to play guidelines and return to play progressions.